All right, so today we are going to take a deep dive into Joey Gallo.
Oh, okay.
Looking at this article that you sent over, Joey Gallo stares down oblivion. It's just fascinating how a guy with that kind of power could be
Yeah.
on the verge of like not even being in Major League Baseball anymore.
Yeah. It's a really interesting question. And the Fangraphs article you sent over, Joey Gallo stares down oblivion, it gets right to the heart of it.
Right. So, it talks about the three true outcomes, which I think anyone listening to this probably knows what that is. But I'm really interested in this stat, XW Bacon.
Right.
And it says that Gallo had one of the highest XWO Bacons ever.
Right.
So what is that exactly?
Well, XWO Bacon, which stands for expected weighted on base average on contact, basically measures how hard a hitter is expected to hit the ball when they make contact.
Okay.
And Gallo, back in 2019, had an XW Bacon of .635, second only to Aaron Judge in the StatCast era, which started tracking this data back in 2015.
Wow.
To put that in perspective, they were the only two players to crack the top 5 during that entire period.
Wow. So it sounds like when he makes contact, it's going to be a rocket.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
So what made his contact so powerful? Was it like his swing or his approach? What was it?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to his swing. The article describes his swing as this incredibly violent, almost primal motion. It's like he's trying to launch the ball into orbit every time he steps up to the plate.
Yeah.
And that approach definitely contributed to his high XW Bacon. He wasn't just trying to make contact, he was swinging for the fences.
Right. Yeah, and that makes sense.
Hmm.
High XW Bacon doesn't tell the whole story, though,
Right.
because he's also known for his strikeouts.
Right. You can't talk about Gallo without talking about his strikeouts. And that's
Wow.
where his 3 true outcomes approach comes in. He embraced strikeouts as part of the game, almost as a necessary evil to get those monster home runs.
Right. The article says that he holds the top TWO spots for the highest whiff percentage in a season over the last decade.
Yeah. Think about that for a second. Out of all the hitters in Major League Baseball over the last 10 years, Joey Gallo swung and missed more often than anyone else, twice.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But was that always part of his game, even when he was in his prime?
Yeah, it's always been a part of who he is as a hitter. But in those peak years, like 2019, those strikeouts were offset by the sheer volume of homers he was hitting. The trade-off seemed to work.
Right. And then this leads us to what the article calls like a turning point, the trade to the Yankees
Yeah.
in 2021.
Right.
And it seems like the Yankees, with all that pressure and stuff, may not have been the ideal landing spot for him.
Yeah, the Yankees with their passionate fans and that New York media pressure cooker weren't exactly the ideal landing spot for a player known for striking out.
Right. So he was coming off a scorching hot month with Texas. He had like 10 home runs or something like that.
Yeah.
And then his average with the Yankees plummeted down to like .160.
Right.
So did New York just like swallow him whole?
It's hard to say for sure, but the article suggests that the pressure might have gotten to him. And it wasn't just the mental side of things. His body started breaking down too. A sprained shoulder, a strained oblique, a foot contusion, 2 separate hamstring strains, even pink eye at one point. It's like his body was rebelling against his violent swing.
Pink eye.
Yeah.
Oh, man. It's like maybe there was more to the story than just these like big injuries.
Yeah.
Maybe it was just a bunch of little things just adding up and
Yeah.
affecting his mechanics.
Yeah, that's a good question. And the article highlights something that might give us a clue, his declining bat speed.
Okay, so how much did it actually drop?
Well, in 2023, his average bat speed was 73.9 mile per hour, placing him in the 84th percentile of hitters.
Okay.
But by 2024, it had dipped to 72.4 mile per hour, which is just barely above average. And the author even suggests that his bat speed might have been even higher at his peak before StatCast began tracking it.
Oh, wow. So for like us non-baseball people, how significant is a drop like that?
Think of it like this. Imagine throwing a ball as hard as you can. Now imagine throwing it with just a little less force. The difference might seem subtle, but it can have a huge impact on how far the ball travels. It's the same with hitting a baseball. Even a small decrease in bat speed can significantly reduce a hitter's power and ability to make solid contact.
So is that like the primary culprit then, the decline in bat speed?
Yeah.
Or is it more complicated than that? So we're talking about a guy who like hit the ball harder than almost anyone in the league.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden his bat speed drops a little bit. And then he just can't hit anymore.
Yeah.
It's got to be more to it than that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely more nuanced. The article digs deeper into like the potential reasons behind Gallo's decline. And it's almost like a detective story,
Yeah.
trying to piece together the clues. Remember all those injuries we talked about?
Oh, yeah. The shoulder and the oblique and the hamstrings
Right.
and even the pink eye. I mean,
Exactly.
his whole body was just like, I'm done.
And the article suggests these injuries like directly impacted his swing.
Okay.
There's this vivid description of Gallo in the batter's box, constantly shifting and adjusting like he's in the middle seat on a Spirit flight.
So what kind of adjustments was he making? Like, was he always kind of fidgety in the box, or was this a new thing?
The article doesn't go into specifics, but it does paint a picture of a player struggling to find comfort, maybe trying to compensate for pain or stiffness.
So it's like a domino effect.
Right.
He gets injured, and then he's uncomfortable, and then his swing is all messed up.
Exactly.
And then he gets more injuries.
Exactly. And then you factor in the declining bat speed, which could be a consequence of those injuries.
Yeah.
Or even a separate issue altogether. It's a real chicken or the egg situation.
Yeah.
Did the injuries cause the slower swing, or was his swing always putting him at risk for those injuries?
Right. It's mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm.
And this leads us to the White Sox.
Yeah.
And they're the ones taking a chance on him now.
Right.
They're trying to, like, revive his career. Honestly, it seems like kind of a risky move.
It's a gamble for sure. And to understand why the White Sox are willing to take this gamble, I think it's helpful to look back at a similar situation they faced back in 2011 with Adam Dunn.
Okay.
Right.
Adam Dunn, he was another
Power hitter known for that 3 true outcomes approach.
Yeah.
Right? And the White Sox signed him to a big 4-year deal, hoping he'd be this major offensive force.
Right.
But things didn't exactly go as planned.
I mean, he struck out a lot.
Yeah.
Which everyone knew he was going to do.
Right.
But he just didn't hit for any power.
Yeah, it was a major disappointment.
Yeah.
And the article draws a parallel between Dunn and Gallo, suggesting that Gallo could be headed down a similar path.
But the thing is, the White Sox were like a completely different team back then. They
Which-
were like contenders.
Right,
This White Sox team, they just set the MLB record for losses.
right.
What do they really need from Gallo at this point?
Well, the author speculates that they're hoping for even a fraction of his peak performance. Even if he hits .190 with a 35% strikeout rate, if he can manage to launch 30 home runs, it could be a win for them.
I don't know. I'm not really buying that scenario.
Right. All right.
I feel like the White Sox already have a lot of power hitters.
Yeah.
Do they really need another one?
Mm-hmm.
Especially one who's so prone to striking out.
It's a valid point.
Yeah.
And to be honest, the article even suggests that Gallo might not even make the team.
Really?
There's a lot of competition for those roster spots.
So he might not even get a chance to
Yeah.
prove himself.
It's a real possibility. But regardless of whether he makes the team or not, the article argues that if he wants any chance at success, he needs to stick to what he does best, hitting for power.
So no, like, trying to become a contact hitter.
Right.
No trying to, like, lower that strikeout rate.
Right. The author basically says if you have him on your team, you don't want him trading off power for contact because he's never going to make enough contact for that to matter.
Right.
You want him swinging out of his shoes, walloping tanks into the stratosphere.
That's a pretty bold statement.
It is, and it really highlights this fundamental question about Gallo's game.
Okay.
Is the raw power worth the high strikeout rate?
Yeah. It's a debate that's raged on about Gallo for years now.
Exactly, and it's part of what makes him such a fascinating case.
All right, so we've talked about Gallo's incredible power and his strikeouts and the injuries and the declining bat speed. What I keep coming back to is, can the guy actually make a comeback?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, after reading this article, I'm not sure there's a clear answer. On the one hand, you've got a guy who just a few years ago was one of the most feared hitters in baseball.
Right.
But then on the other hand, his decline has been so steep and so sudden, it's hard to imagine him reversing course at this point.
Yeah. The article mentions that the White Sox have a bit of a history with these, like, reclamation projects.
Right.
Bringing in aging sluggers like Manny Ramirez and Ken Griffey Jr.,
Yeah.
Andrew Jones, guys hoping to squeeze out one last hurrah.
You're right.
Do you think Gallo fits into that mold?
I think there are some parallels for sure, but those guys, even in their twilight years, still had something to offer.
Right.
Griffey still had his defense. Ramirez still had his plate discipline. What does Gallo have left?
Right.
He's not a great defender. He's not a base-stealing threat.
Right.
He's a power hitter, and if that power is gone...
Right. Then he's not really bringing much to the table.
Exactly.
The article kind of floats this idea of Gallo hitting like .190
Right.
with a 35% strikeout rate,
Right.
but still managing to crank out 30 home runs.
Yeah.
That just seems more like a fantasy than a realistic outcome.
It does sound a bit far-fetched, I'll give you that. But let's play devil's advocate for a second.
All right.
Let's say he does somehow manage to hit 30 homers.
Okay.
Is that enough to justify his spot on a major league roster?
I guess it depends on what the White Sox are trying to accomplish.
Right.
If they're aiming for a World Series, probably not.
Right.
But if they're just trying to, put some butts in seats
Yeah.
to inject some excitement into a team that was historically bad last year, then maybe.
Exactly. It all comes down to expectations. And I think that's what makes Gallo such a fascinating case study. He forces us to confront our own biases about what makes a valuable baseball player. Do we value batting average above all else? Or are we willing to accept a high strikeout rate if it comes with game-changing power?
Yeah, it's a question that has no easy answer. And I think that's part of what makes this whole story so captivating. We're drawn to these players who defy easy categorization, who force us to rethink our assumptions about the game.
The author describes Gallo as one of the strangest and most spectacular players I've ever seen. And I think that sums it up perfectly. He's an enigma, a statistical anomaly, a player who can be simultaneously brilliant and frustrating.
So what's the final verdict? Can Joey Gallo make a comeback, or is this the end of the line for him?
I don't have a crystal ball. But what I can say is that Joey Gallo's story is far from over. Whether he succeeds or fails, it's going to be a spectacle. And I, for one, can't wait to see what happens next.
Yeah. And to our listener, I think this deep dive raises some really thought-provoking questions. How much are you willing to sacrifice in batting average for a player with Gallo's power potential? Is the thrill of the home run worth the agony of the strikeout? It's a debate that's likely to continue as long as baseball is played. And for a player like Joey Gallo, it's a debate that will always be at the heart of his story. Thanks for joining us.